If you want to make the world accessible through technology and make technology accessible, how would you go about it? I'm Pinar Gvanch, and welcome to What's Wrong with the Podcast. In this episode, we're joined by Dr. Jennifer Mankoff and Dr. Heather Feldner from CREATE, the Center for Research and Education on Accessible Technology and Experiences at the University of Washington. CREATE was founded by a multidisciplinary group working across computer science, rehabilitation medicine, engineering, design, information science, and disability studies to make technology more accessible and to make the world more accessible through technology. Dr. Jennifer Mankoff directs CREATE and is a professor in the Paul G. Allen School of Computer Science and Engineering at the University of Washington. Their work focuses on accessibility, disabled agency, and technologies such as generative AI, data science, 3D printing, and computational knitting to address real-world accessibility challenges. Dr. Heather Feldner is an associate professor at the University of Washington with appointments in rehabilitation medicine, mechanical engineering, and disability studies. She's also a founding associate director of CREATE. Her research sits at the intersection of mobility, disability, ableism, and technology, with a focus on pediatric mobility, access, participation, and how technology can support development. Enjoy. Jen, Heather, welcome.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Great to be
Thanks,
here.
thanks for being here. I would love to, and for our audiences as well, hear more about your own stories and how you found each other at Create.
I
Um,
would
Sure
say
thing.
we founded Create.
Great. I found it great. Jen, do you want to go first? This is fun.
Um,
Good.
yeah, I don't know. Heather was at the University of Washington when I arrived there, and we were actually among a group of 9 faculty that came together to found this center, who were all doing research in accessibility that had something to do with technology, digital technology often, but to some extent also physical technologies that support accessibility. And I don't know about you, Heather, but for me to arrive at UW and have this sort of critical mass of amazing
Mhm.
people all doing this kind of work was incredibly exciting. And we were very lucky that Microsoft was also excited about that.
Mhm.
And that was what helped to launch us, although I think that the good work was being done even before that and
Mhm.
has continued since. In 2020, Microsoft gave us a large gift, and that was really sort of the moment that catalyzed the center,
Mhm.
which we are both part of.
Mhm.
I'm sure you have things to add to that, Heather.
Yeah, no, that's just such a great kind of summary of how things came together. And I think what was really exciting from my perspective is the multidisciplinary nature of Create. As Jen mentioned, there was a group of us that were already doing accessibility work, but we were kind of in our silos, right? And some of us were in rehab medicine, some of us were in computer science, some of us were in engineering, or design. And the fact that we kind of found each other and could come together to form that critical mass, I think that was really exciting as somebody with a rehab medicine background, for example. I never thought that I would be as closely collaborating with folks from these other disciplines. And it's just really been an incredible experience to get to do that.
Yeah, we have information science, so the information school represented mechanical engineering, rehab medicine, and also I want to just add, and you're a representative of this, Heather, disability studies,
Hmm.
which is something that adds a critical flavor to the work we do that I think is really, really important, in addition to the technical prowess that our faculty represent. And it's really complementary to it as
Hmm.
well.
Well, I love, when I first came across Create, I love the multidisciplinary aspect of it, obviously. And I think the silos you mentioned, Heather, is a chronic
Hmm.
problem, and
Hmm.
many other topics and areas and issues that we're facing in the world today. And the fact that you 9 of you, you said, like joining
Hmm.
forces to found this, and it's always important to have this industry partner that would help recognize and launch, but it's also great
Hmm.
that you grew out of that and also do independent work.
Hmm. Hmm.
Oh, for sure. And our funding is quite diverse, right? We have funding from the National Institute on Disability, NIDLR. I should know the acronym by heart, but I don't. Um, it's got a lot of letters in it. Um, Multiple other industry partners. NSF funds some of our faculty independently, but like we bring it all together, right? We've been very lucky to get support from GitHub for open source initiatives. So each group that comes to us comes, Apple, um, Google, they each have different perspectives on it. And then we also have our own perspectives on what's important to
Hmm.
us. And we now have a rehab engineering research center from NIDLR that's generally across all of information and computing technology with a focus on AI. But we also had an initial gift for Heather and a collaborator of hers, Kat Steele, to look specifically at early childhood development and how mobility impacts that. And we have, other things going on like the ARRT from NIDLR, that's a training grant for postdocs in the intersections of fabrication, rehab science, disability studies, accessibility. So we're very broad, and I think that is both representative of who we are as a center, and
Hmm.
sometimes makes it hard for us to explain what we do to people. Um,
No,
yeah.
no, I totally understand that because even when we use the word accessibility, I think we want to like silo it into a corner. Meanwhile,
Hmm.
like as you mentioned in early childhood and aging, in disability community, in just like everyday life ergonomics or convenience or ease of use, like there's so many areas that it touches upon. And the fact that you are coming from these different disciplines, I think, you kind of see the big picture more easily. But I recognize, I think maybe that's part of our like trying to put it in a bucket or label or silo
Hmm.
culture that like it's
Hmm.
hard for you to kind of describe what you're doing. At the same time, it's even more important to work the way you're working because the way you then, I think, synthesize all together, I think that's an invaluable experience, right? Because being able
Hmm.
to see the synergies between different populations or experiences or technologies or cross-pollinating the learnings, I
Hmm.
think that only comes from like the setup you have,
Hmm.
which you could only wish like in corporate industry, organizational departments kind of follow your follow your structure.
Right. Right. And that's actually a really good point because there are a lot of corporate partners that have reached out to create, to partner. And I think they are looking to that kind of model, right? They're looking to that space for innovation, and for kind of idea sharing and the cross pollination that you mentioned, that, may not be happening, may be happening in different ways.
Right,
And so that's just a really neat, avenue for partnership because there's also a lot that, from the university side, we may not be able to necessarily push forward at the same rate. And so having those
right.
partners, is just a great opportunity to be able to do that in a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I also think, though, that another really important thread of what drives our work and defines it is the fact that we are about 50% disabled identifying. So
Hmm.
I identify as
Hmm.
disabled, so do many of the students in Create and
Hmm.
multiple faculty in Create. And I think that we are probably one of the largest producers of autoethnographic research
Hmm.
in accessibility, for example, and not every person works on and studies their own disability, but even when our students look at other spheres of accessibility work, I think they are influenced by their understanding of the importance of lived experience. And we do
Hmm.
have a very strong translation program as well, and a community partners program that is a key piece of that. And so I think that infuses how we do things in a really important way.
Hmm.
yeah, and that's such a, valuable insight. I think anyone to kind of look into models that could be really innovative in their space too, because
Hmm.
we often say, I mean, I teach inclusive design and
one thing I keep bringing up is lived experience being equally as important as professional expertise, if not
Hmm.
more, because for professional study, you can go to school for. Lived experience, you cannot necessarily go to school for, right? It only
Hmm.
comes if you embody it. And having kind of this community leading, community-led research as well, like people from the community, I think it speaks to the authenticity of the issues that you're also looking into, but
Hmm.
also the mindfulness of the process and how you would go about doing research, right? So I think
Hmm.
it's incredibly valuable and a great model for other centers to also follow. I want to bring us to kind of the problem space. I think one thing by simply your model, you're addressing kind of the silos issues that already had came up. But let's talk about kind of accessibility in technology or everyday life, really.
Hmm. Hmm.
Some, if anything, like any emerging themes or issues or chronic issues you're seeing in maybe in diverse populations or fields, and also with AI, and not that AI is new, but because it's now at such an accelerating speed, um, how you see that kind of playing into either amplifying problems or bettering them, which with the bettering we can come to later. But for now, let's like kind of sit on a little bit of like problems that we're seeing and the underlying reasons for them.
Yeah, I can start there. I think one of the things, one of the problem areas that we're seeing, and my work is very much kind of situated in that kind of physical accessibility
Hmm.
space. We are seeing a lack of access to appropriate assistive technologies, and sometimes we're seeing technologies that may meet the needs of some, but may need more customization or kind of bespoke elements that are not currently available. And so I think one of the ways in which we're trying to kind of push into that problem space is to think about ways to kind of democratize access to do-it-yourself options, to understand how folks maybe with lower resource settings or maybe rural settings can have access to technologies that may be more available in higher resource or urban settings, and I think that's challenging because you want to make sure you're using local resources. You're also wanting to make sure that folks are aware of what's out there, and that they're that you have the tools to be able to either work with somebody who has access, and can support, or to maybe work to create something yourself in partnership with somebody who might have the tools that you need. So I think that kind of access is excuse me, a little bit of a kind of wicked problem that we deal with on a daily basis. And in addition to thinking about how environments are designed,
Mm.
I think there's a lot of retrofitting that happens in the world, and there's obviously, as legal aspects of what should be done change over time, and how those are um, how those are enacted. Um, we know that physical spaces just aren't as accessible as they should be, and I think we're seeing again another push in that direction.
Yeah.
But that can look very different globally, right? And so, kind of being responsive to those local contexts, I think, is another area where we need to continue to push forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And it looks like, building bespoke and having access to specific physical world technologies, but also transportation, which is a big area of focus for some of the folks in the center. And I would argue there's also a thread of the work in the center that's looking at who can create. And so that kind of it gets to both the fact that there is an existing culture of do-it-yourself problem solving in the disability community, And that includes everything from, you know, woodworking to AI, right? It's like, it's very broad how that plays out. And it's been going on for a long time. That expertise is very much present, and not necessarily dependent on clinical expertise, although there is also a DIY community among clinical makers that is core to the practice of access support. Um, so that's, I think, very important. And one of the things that our postdoc traineeship, for example, was hoping to bring people into exploring.
Mhm.
And it looks like resistance sometimes, it looks like collaboration
Mhm.
sometimes, it looks like just, getting out there and solving problems regardless of what's available sometimes. But there's another piece to that that I just want to highlight because we're talking about problems, which is that um, we were talking earlier about the importance of um, lived experience in and bringing communities into research and doing community-centered design. But Create also believes that we need to make sure that disabled people have access to the same expertise to be the experts in the room and not only to be included as participant designers. And so that's where we need to change higher ed, right? We need to make sure that a deaf-blind person can major in mechanical engineering if they want to, or oceanography or whatever else, and that, that the campus is accessible, that the digital materials on campus, so the physical campus is accessible, the digital materials are accessible, that we can teach accessibly and inclusively of all of the identities that should be represented on as leaders on the project teams, not only as participants. And there's a lot of work to be done there. And so, it's my belief as center director that it's my job not only to, support the faculty and students by giving them or supporting opportunities for research, but also to advocate at the campus level so that anyone who is disabled and beyond the campus, right, has equal access to the education, to the conferences, you name it, that we should be able to participate in as disabled people.
100% agree. I think we always talk about like the evolution of design where, and we see models of it still, like all of them, but like ideally they're growing in this trajectory. Like there was like design at people, right? Like we tell you this is the best and you're going to use it, and then design for people. And now where there's like this major push for design with, but eventually and ideally with technologies like AI too, we can get to design by. And I think for that to even like come to life, the leadership piece that you mentioned and design, work being led by members of the community, I think that's crucial for us to be able to get there. And I think in the problem space, what's really interesting and it feels very piecemeal, because to your point, there's a lot of retrofitting and, adapting, but there is no one full journey that feels accessible, right? Like, because obviously everything is at this world phygital, right? That's the word, and so the UI might be accessible of something, but then the keyboard they're going to use or the mouse they're going to use is not. And so like, how do you even get that UI? Or maybe you adapted your your hardware, but then the, let's say, design software or I don't know, coding platform, like that's not accessible, right? So it's like, and then to your point, even you want to go into the building, like, is there even a elevator in this building, right? Especially when we look at these like older, like legacy institutions. And I think it was very interesting, and I and heard this from the disability community during the pandemic too. Like I've known people who were denied from college because it's not accessible, and it was for, they were really denying for them, like it's for your own good because we don't have an accessible campus. But then during the pandemic, when we all went remote, oh, suddenly online learning was an option, and I think obviously, progress is not linear and nothing is going to change overnight. And it kind of takes everyone to come together and like work on things. But the frustration, and I would love to get your perspectives on this, of kind of discouraging from participation because like throughout the journey, facing kind of these like roadblocks, like it seems accessible, but it's not accessible. And it's, like kind of this like up and down journey. the the psychological implication of that almost, or like how does that have a more impact on the community and how they perceive either themselves can be in a field or how they perform in a field.
To that exact point, I was thinking of, so in our disability studies faculty meetings, we end with a poem. It's just a fun tradition that we do, and it just is really helpful in kind of finding words sometimes when words are difficult to find to kind of describe the state of the world and what we may be experiencing individually or as a group or as a society. And there is one of the poems that we read kind of toward the end of the pandemic was this poem by Aurora Levins Morales, and it's called Zoomlandia. And Aurora is a disabled poet, and it was the whole poem was very much was talking about that exact thing, right? Like disabled people have been advocating for years for more access, and the second that this becomes, you know, a quote unquote mainstream problem, all of a sudden the access that we've been asking for years and years is suddenly okay and suddenly easy to do. Um, and calls attention to that tension and to that kind of dismissal of disabled folks and their needs. And I'm a member of the disability community as well, and I just that really resonated with me in terms of
Mm,
if we think about it, access doesn't have to be as challenging as I think it is made to be. Um, and it's just a beautiful poem. So I'm happy to share the
oh
resource
yes,
for the
add a link
listeners.
to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we can't ignore the fact that that then dissipated again when mainstream didn't believe
Yeah.
it was important. And now, another place that I've been fighting that battle for years is conference access. And
Oh,
they also briefly allowed, remote participation or hybrid participation. And now we're in a world where there's so many reasons. I mean, there have always been so many reasons why people can't attend conferences, but the number is going up, if anything, not
yeah.
down. And yet, it's still not considered mainstream or necessary to accommodate that, even though people's rights are in danger of being violated if they attend conferences in some cases, right?
Yeah.
And I don't just mean disabled people. And
Yeah.
so, um, yeah, I think we need to do better. It is well understood, too, that when we solve problems for disability, we often improve the lives of everybody who touches those technologies. And yet,
Yeah.
be it curb cuts or speech recognition or any number of other things, right? We push forward a better society for everyone. And that shouldn't be necessary to justify doing this. But it is so hard to understand why we deny ourselves those advances when it's true.
100%. Like it's so short-sighted. Like when I was going through pregnancy, I think I benefited from all the resting areas that were accessible and available. And then once I had my baby, like I would rely on my wheelchair using friends on which subway stops to take in New York City because most of them don't have elevators. Or I would ask hands-free devices I could use because at home I always was carrying a baby. So I think I don't know why we have this misconception, but it's the only minority that we're all joining one day. Whether we identify as disabled or not, like the implications that we might have with aging or temporary life events or injuries, like we all need these options available. And I think that is what I find so short-sighted, but it also, to your point, speaks to kind of like meaningful allyship, right? Like in the end, you mentioned multidisciplinary. There's something about, you may not identify as disabled, but you could still feel equally passionate and be in this space and just want to create a more accessible world. And I think working in joint leadership or in design processes with people with disabilities. And it's funny because I serve on the board of Open Style Lab, which started at MIT and then became a nonprofit and with the mission to make style accessible for people with disabilities. And I don't identify as having a disability. And I was asked multiple times if I have one. And I'm like, do I have to have one? Like we are 50% also led by, people who are disabled, but it doesn't need to be 100%. Like, can I can't I be passionate about this? But I guess like one thing that started to like I think a shift I saw even so we run these summer programs where engineers, designers, occupational and physical therapists used to come together with a person with a disability and co-create accessible wearables because there's no ADA
Hmm.
regulations for it, right? And
Hmm.
that was the kind of the social service project that started at MIT. And when we had fellowship announcements, we wouldn't get anyone with a disability for engineering, design, or OT, PT. We would bring community,
Hmm.
like the lived experience as a different fellowship, right? But I think about 5 years ago or 4 or 5 years ago, the fellowship applications started to increase with people who
Hmm.
have, and seeing that was so beautiful. And now, like, I think at least 50% of our fellows in the summer programs also are like engineers, designers who also identify as disabled. And so it's going by this like design with to design by. But I'm seeing, okay, something, and to your point, like the attendance to the conferences are increasing. So this also is showing things are becoming more accessible, and technology must be helping in some way because we're seeing, and also there's generational maybe differences and things like that. But seeing that is beautiful, and I think to your point, and not to kind of toot on fear around this, but like we don't want to go back, we don't want to pull that progress back. And
Hmm.
because I
Hmm.
did see that in like education, or you're so
Hmm.
right on like conferences. Um,
I
so
do want to say, though, that the disability community also needs to broaden more how it approaches things so that,
Hmm.
like, a
Hmm.
lot of the accessibility research that's happened over the years has sort of implicitly assumed that disabled people are white, for
Hmm.
example,
yeah,
Hmm.
right? And like,
yeah,
or monolingual, right? That they only speak English and so on and so forth. And there's
right.
we need to increase representation in disability spaces and work to explicitly include a variety of perspectives, both disabled and non-disabled, from other
Yeah,
communities.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, I
Sorry.
think that's the
And I say
beauty of
that that's othering
inclusion.
even how I said that, right? I mean, other than me, but like obviously, and other than this, like the traditional disability way it's done, but
Right, right.
it's there's so much room for growth on our side as disabled white disabled
Hmm.
leaders, let's say,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Um,
But
Yes.
as
I think is that's just inclusion, I think, is like a roadmap, right? Like we can't we can't get more and more and more and more inclusive. There's
Hmm.
no like, oh, there's this we represented disability, good, we're good. Like there. So I think
Right.
that also just like that could keep us in a growth mindset, right?
Hmm.
That there's always room to improve. Um, and I think, um, but I think it's great that you kind of like said that too, because I think there's like inclusion work in all communities,
Hmm. Hmm.
but definitely for, I don't even know what mainstream means. Like, who is like, what's the normal anyway? Like, especially for a New
Right.
Yorker, that's such a wild question. Like, are we normal? We live in the city. And, I think like it's everyone's responsibility and not like, oh, it's that community's responsibility or it's not my
Hmm.
problem.
Hmm. Hmm.
I want to come back to the question around the famous word of the century, AI, or
Hmm.
like acronym of the century. How do you see it amplifying problems and following that, bringing solutions, and then maybe from there on we can talk about like the great work that is being done.
Yeah, well, Jen's definitely the expert, more so in this area. So I'm going to shift it over to her very quickly. But what I will say is that, one of the early kind of more early identified problems is that AI was biased and is biased. And we know that to be the case, not only with disability, but also with race and ethnicity, with, um, nationality, with language. And so that is, there are some people doing really good work in in the AI space, some partners of Create for sure, to try and to recognize that and to kind of see what solutions can be incorporated, because we know that the AI machine is just going to continue to grow. Um, so I think, the bias is a huge issue, and privacy has also been another big issue, particularly in the disability community who may rely on certain technologies for access daily, but also have concerns about how their information is being used and mined and that sort of thing. So that's my kind of less informed 2 cents about it. I'm gonna shoot it
That's
over to
great
Jen because I know she has
observations.
a
Thank
lot to say about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to pick and choose because there is so much to say. But picking up on 2 points Heather made on the bias front, we have done studies showing some of these biases. An example being that if you were to take or we did a study with a case study of a resume that had a leadership award and a scholarship that mentioned disability, and we removed them, making a
Mhm.
new, almost identical but less prestigious resume. And the version of ChatGPT we were testing at the time ranked the less prestigious resume above the more prestigious one
Wow.
very reliably across we also changed which disability was mentioned. It's just like 75% of the time, 100 for some
Wow.
disabilities. And its explanations sort of were throwbacks on the stigma and biases that are associated with disability in everyday language all the time, which, given that it is, regurgitating what other people say,
Right,
is
right.
perhaps not a surprise.
Yeah.
But it did turn into real, like, action or real ranking related things that I think are problematic. And it's not impossible to imagine even a single prompt improving that, and we showed that that could help. But so that's there. We also just this week to a Create postdoc and a Create student were at a conference in Barcelona presenting work that surveyed a wide range of people with disabilities from different um, race, language, cultural, gender backgrounds to ask about how they use AI. It was
Mm,
actually a series of focus groups and what problems they encountered. And one of the interesting things that came out of that that speaks to Heather's second point was that so first of all, we have a whole series of studies now that demonstrate that AI is incredibly valuable for filling access gaps. It should not be an excuse for society not to do its job. But in the meantime, if you want to get through college or whatever else, having it as a filler is helpful. But with that comes a new kind of access tax. So if you've
mm,
heard the term like the disability tax before, it refers to this idea that and this I think applies to many different like stigmatized or minoritized identities, right? That we pay in time and other kinds of things, right? That need to do
yeah,
better than the equivalent person, et cetera, et cetera. And so with AI, we now have these new access taxes that people are paying for access, right? Like they're literally having to pay for AI credits because otherwise they can't do the things they want. But they're also paying with their privacy and
right.
their time in maybe training it to be less biased and so on and so forth. And these are taxes that are not required of people without disabilities. That we need to acknowledge and recognize as problematic.
Right.
At the same time, and despite the biases that we just talked about, there are ways in which AI sometimes does better, right? Like it is, we have stories in that paper of people who really appreciated that they could speak to AI without masking in their preferred language or dialect, and it would just understand them,
Mm,
right?
mm,
And maybe even in some cases respond back in a similar dialect, which was appreciated, or in other cases respond back not in that dialect, which was appreciated. And
mm.
in other cases, again, it might be offensive if it did either of those things,
Right.
right? So it's not clear cut, but it's still a different set of experiences than people had in the past. Some actually very positive.
Right, right. That's such a good point. I guess that's one of the potential like opportunities that the hyper personalization at scale, right? Like if I don't want it that way, you can like prompt it that way. And but the cost here, and I want to say cost and not tax, because I feel like it's almost like giving up on something sometimes. It's not just like this added time you might be spending, but you might be giving away your privacy, right? And I think the cost of it is higher. I mean, I guess like I don't want to say higher return, higher risk because we're like humans and not like stocks in the market. But I think like for example, I have a dear friend who's legally blind. She's a mother of two, and she uses Meta glasses because it unlocked her life, and she is, very excited that in a lot of things she can be more independent and doesn't have to ask her, 5-year-old to help her with stuff. But at the same time, she's equally very concerned and terrified that she has these glasses in the house around her kids and she doesn't know what to do about it. And it's this massive trade-off and it starts to bring these like ethical conflicts almost into the space. And it's frustrating that the community that could benefit from it almost most, right, in so many ways, also are paying again a higher price. And to your point, also like if it's super helpful and they can rely on an AI, how reliable is AI? And like the information it's providing, could we really rely on it? Or what type of AI models or AI tools we need to be seeing in the space, I guess would be my follow-up questions to create more security in using these tools, to create more reliability in using these tools, in addition to just having them being accessible.
So I just wanted to mention, because of the topic you brought up, it's probably worth mentioning Rua Williams's book, Disabling Intelligences, which also ties AI use to the history of eugenics that disabled people have faced as well. And there's so much potential and real harm behind these tools.
Yeah,
And so like I think there's even just the cost of like agonizing over whether to use these glasses is
Exactly.
something we should recognize, right? And you mentioned the issue of correctness, and that's another challenge because most systems for AI verification and transparency assume that you have full access to the inputs and the outputs of the system you're using. But by definition, if you're using AI for accessibility, you probably can't access either the inputs or the outputs,
Exactly.
right? And so how do we support verification and confidence in that setting is a real unknown right now, I think.
Yeah. Heather, anything you would like to add to that?
oh gosh. I mean, no, I think it's just a really, I think it's a really kind of wicked problem in terms of knowing that in a perfect world, these tools would be trustworthy and powerful and adaptable to meet everyone's individual needs. Um, but we know that there's always going to be the kind of like that kind of problematic component, right? In terms of privacy, in terms of information, in terms of how that may or may not be used to either um, further discriminate or
Right.
isolate you, right?
Right.
Rather than empower you and support your interdependence, right? So yeah, it's just one of those really sticky things, and
Yeah.
we know it's not going to go away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so how do we kind of direct um, our research, direct our activism, direct our kind of collective power um, to tackle some of these wicked problems surrounding AI? I think that it's a vastly open space for work to be done in that area right now.
Yeah, and I guess it ties also back to kind of like having the people in the room, especially, there we already have, that problem in many other fields, but also in AI. I mean, forgetting even AI itself being a black box, but like the process of like the life cycle of AI development. I think we obviously don't have enough representation in those, and I think if anything, like we talked about kind of these like joint concerns across communities. Like I think privacy is a very uniting one. So, but I think to your point, Jen, on, things like transparency and how that was designed, like I don't think anybody was thinking about that when that those are models were being created, So I think, and if, already like as a co-design practitioner, I see that's lagging in many industries, but like I think in this space, especially, it's lagging to non-existent. And I know in academic circles, there's research about like participatory methods, pluralistic alignment, and things like that. But in practice, and I guess the bigger problem also, like there's a really handful of like companies also leading this work and on such rushed timelines for whatever reasons. But I think it's interesting, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm still an optimist when it comes to AI. I want to stay that way, but I'm a cautionary optimist. Like I don't understand the delusional optimists, like who suddenly think we have the utopia and it's going to be A to A business models with which somebody at a conference decided to explain to me, like, do you know A to A? Do you know B to B or B to C? Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's going to be A to A. I'm like, thank you for thank you for the explanation. So I don't get that hype. I think there's nothing wrong with being cautious. And if anything, I think if we could really reframe this, like, obviously during this like momentous like change shift in how we work, how we live, like happening, we're gonna see all these problems like bubbling. And if we really can catch them as early warnings and really treat AI almost as a mirror of society too. Like right now, to your point, Jen, it's like all the bias, or Heather, like all the bias you talked about, like it is the mirroring of, what research was done, what data was collected, what representation exists. It's like it amplifies, I think, the problems we have in the society. So if we can see that as an opportunity to, okay, we're gonna work in these areas, or we're gonna double down on these problem areas, or catch the early warnings, it can be good. I want to say that to kind of shift the AI to a more positive lens. We're already seeing the good. There's great use cases. And I think going back to the multidisciplinarity of it too, I don't see much design thinking in these development spaces either. And I think it shows, or in academic work, I think there's so much of like, visualization, storytelling can be brought in to engage the public more so. And I think we need to bring more create into the field, the create attitude into the field to really be able to, I guess, shift the trajectory in the way that it should be going.
I love that you just touched on design thinking, right? Because as somebody with a healthcare background, right? Like I'm a rehabilitation professional. I had a lot of interest in technology from a clinical standpoint originally, and then through, my graduate training and through getting connected to Create, really kind of found myself gravitating toward that idea of design thinking, and that's just not something that a lot of folks being trained in certain
Yeah,
spaces get, right?
yeah.
And so I love bringing that idea into more of maybe like the healthcare spaces, and I know that it has been much more ingrained and a part of some of the other disciplines that Create is made of. And so that's just one instance where um I think that approach and that kind of process of design thinking can really elevate everything that we do. And so it's exciting for me, as someone newer to that way of thinking than some other folks that have been kind of trained in that from the get-go. And that's been really great.
I mean, I think your work is such a great example also of how AI is only ever going to be a piece of what we should be doing, right? So I'm
Uh,
going to summarize it briefly what I'm seeing, Heather, and then you should absolutely jump in and correct, right? So Heather helped to lead work that demonstrated that when toddlers have access to mobility, it improves their brain development, their communication skills, their motor skills, you name it, right? And that basic research is part of how people get their rights met. But then that same project ended up collaborating with a faculty member who was working on transportation and sidewalk accessibility,
Yeah,
right? Which is a place where AI has a small role to play because it can help us identify problems from images that are readily available through Google Maps, for example,
right,
right? And
right.
there's also some data there that you might want to collect. And so there's like a multidisciplinary piece. There's sort of the basic research, there's the technology innovation, and then there's like AI doing what AI can do well to make up for lack of information, but not trying to do everything. So
Exactly.
that's kind of my take on how we should be doing this. I don't know what you think, Heather.
No, I love that. Yeah, and that was a beautiful summary, and I think that that's just it's a great example of kind of how these different disciplines and how these different pieces come together in a way that leverages the strengths of all of those different approaches. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love this as also like an advice and recommendation too, because I think, yes, it's a hype, and yes, there's so much fear being instilled, like, oh, if you don't like have your agent running 24/7, you're not a person, whatever, like these pressure we're feeling. But I've also seen leaders, like, and this is a live experience that I'm going to share anonymously, a leader in an industry about community research that we were going to lead, saying, well, why aren't we just asking AI? And this is a very experienced, seasoned person. So that to me is very alarming if this comes top down to people, right? And if leaders being short-sighted in this space and not understanding, like, it can't replace community feedback, you just can't. Like, it can do many things. It can give you whatever, like the mean average response people might give, or it can give you, like, it can recognize patterns coming up, but you still need to do your research. But not understanding how AI should show up and simply trying to replace processes or like key ingredients that would go into something, then I'm kind of like, well, maybe you should be replaced by AI. Because if you're already asking AI and that's like your leadership, you can be replaced by AI. That doesn't make any sense. So I think we really need to, and this is what, like, as a design educator, what I'm very mindful of telling like students as well, it's switching from more like product or output or design to a process or system design, where they need to understand where does AI show up and how. And the use case, I think we all need to be in like problem setting.
So I think that this is sort of the key question of our time, right? We should not be using AI to produce things as if they like the kind of, let's talk about AI versus generative AI, perhaps. Generative AI, right, it is always going to reproduce the most obvious, like the most common next thing, essentially, right? And so it is going to make errors. It's going to replace things with the assumption of those things instead. And we shouldn't be using it as if it won't do that, right? And other AI has its own flaws. And um, we also therefore need to really like carefully design how and where we use AI so that it fills the gaps it is good at filling and other things fill the gaps they're good at filling. And we also, sorry, I have many ands here, but I think we also need to prioritize the human work that is not AI in that as well. So for example, Create as part of our RERC has a website called alleyhood.org, which is A11Y hood.org, that is just trying to collect and feature open source accessibility solutions from knitting to fabrication to software, which gets right back to that DIY thing we were talking about
Right.
earlier, right? And those may or may not have AI in them, but they are things that humans came up with and believed were important and put time into creating. And we want people to be able to find those and benefit from them and contribute to them and learn from them and all of that, right? And I think that that is part of the antidote, antidote to the AI world as well, in my opinion. Yeah.
This was also such a beautiful advice. Anything else you would like to add? And Heather, what would also be your advice? Both, like, I guess we can go, like, we can say things around AI, but also beyond AI. Any advice?
Gosh, yes, there's so many different things to think about in terms of that question. I love it. I would say first and foremost to seek out opportunities in areas you are not trained in. Because and like for example, the AI, for example, is a great one, right? Like that's not something I have been trained in, but through my interactions with Create, through my work on some of these collaborative research projects, like I've gotten to learn a lot more and gotten to kind of broaden my perspective on maybe how I can contribute to, ongoing work in this area, right? So that's, I think, first and foremost. Second is surround yourself with people who are asking critical questions. It's really easy to get complacent, I think, in whatever field you choose to go into. And it's okay, and it's very valuable to have a critical lens toward whatever your own chosen profession is. And I think that again, just helps us think about how we can be um, responsible contributors to our society in whatever our given field is, but ask questions that keep pushing those boundaries in terms of who things are designed for, by whom things have been designed, who do they benefit, and how do we include voices of people that have been traditionally and historically marginalized in all aspects, disability and elsewhere.
Thank you. Jen?
Oh, I don't know how to follow on Heather's points. They're so great, but I think there's also just a reminder to myself that I try to keep in mind is to try to be open to all of the perspectives that come my way and to, you know, start with that, right? Even if maybe they don't have disability studies as well integrated yet or whatever else as I like the way that I think, that doesn't mean that it's not work that we should prioritize or support or understand better. And then it's the people first, right? So trying to understand each individual that I encounter and how I can support them in succeeding is always my starting place. And that is why it's, obviously where some of the advocacy comes from, but also just how it comes about that lived experience actually has a place for people in the work that they do. And it's where all of the success comes from, right? Like I don't know, as a leader, I don't actually get to do that much, right? But if I can help the people around me succeed, then we're going somewhere. And so I know that's not necessarily about how do we solve all of AI or all of accessibility, but it also is in the sense that I can't tackle every problem, but every person that I empower is amplifying the ability to solve problems, right? And so we don't have to solve every problem on day one, but we just need to create space to me. Yeah.
I love that. Both of you, thank you so much. This was such a fun conversation, and I can talk to you both all day. And
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
thanks for
thank you so much.
joining. And thank you for your chicken to also joining us for this session.
I'm sorry, I did not predict this, but one of my chickens came in the back door and came upstairs and it's
Oh my
now
God.
in my living room. She's so loud. Funny. I will clean up the poop later. Let's keep going.
Thank you so, so much for watching this week's episode. If you found value in these conversations, please like our video and hit the subscribe button. And subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts so you never miss an episode. Please leave us a comment or review, or you can simply tell your friends about us. And don't forget to join us next week. See you.